All right, Jake, you and I are together after a few weeks after our interview with Greg Mattson on Quick Media. And
hmm
it was such a great experience to be able to talk to Greg. And I felt like things went really well. We were able to say some of the things that were on our minds. And Greg gave some, some really reasonable pushback and questions, and it was a great conversation. But I know that we've talked for a little while about doing a follow up discussion just to dive a little deeper. We'll probably cover some of the same ground that we did in that interview, and that's such a bigger platform, but.
hmm
Um, but yeah, I know we had just wanted to anyone who's listening, we'd wanted to kind of do a deeper dive. And so if you haven't listened to that interview, maybe start there first and then work your way here. And Jake and I have a lot we want to explore and share here about our thoughts on theology and philosophy in the church. And so we're probably going to start doing this more often. But please forgive us if we're a little bumpy. As you can see, we're just using Riverside. We're jumping right in. Both of us have some media background, but for the moment, we just thought it's better to just get started and
Yeah.
start discussing our thoughts. So
Yeah,
anyway,
I know we've been wanting to do something like this for so long. It's like, oh well, if we can do this, if we can have this set up and they have it scheduled in, and then finally, I think we're both just at the point where it's like, screw it. It's better to do something imperfectly than keep
that's right.
waiting because it's
Yeah.
been years and you can't wait anymore.
No, and we're both so busy, which is good. It's a good
hmm
thing. I mean, between your freaking insane humanities education with a brand new college and running your own landscaping business, then me with my films
Yeah,
and
traveling the world with your films, going
yeah.
all over the place.
Exactly. I think probably we're just gonna start setting a time and getting the rhythm and discussing, getting our thoughts, and if it lands, then we'll start. We'll build the ship as we sail it, as you
That's
said. So
right.
so something that I wanted to ask you about that I felt like we didn't. You gave a really nice overview, but I remember when I was visiting you in California, we went on that walk, and you gave me a much larger kind of summary of the history between uh, between peculiar people and then Jesus and John Wayne, and how one kind of picks up from the other, and it's this tense, complex history between Latter-day Saints and the rest of Christianity, and right wing politics and our assimilation and sort of what we are and what we're not. And I kind of wanted just to invite you to start there again, if you don't mind, and like give that whole story kind of the way you gave it to me, because I feel like that sets the groundwork for everything that's causing me and you to like want to pull our hair out here with
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, I totally agree with you in the sense that it's like, oh, it just all seems to stem from this historical trend that, just to briefly overview Peculiar People for those who haven't watched the Quick Media interview yet, because I think we spent the most time on that in that interview, is that particular book. Um, J. Spencer Fluhman, who is the department chair of history at BYU, a very well respected scholar. He wrote a book about a decade ago at this point called A Peculiar People, which is about the relationship between the American majority Protestants, many of them being evangelicals, but not all of them, and the sort of like othered faiths of the time, the most prominent one in the book being Latter-day Saints. Because if there's one thing that we're not, says the early 1800s American Protestant,
Coalition.
we're not the Muslims, we're not the Catholics, and we're certainly not the Mormons. And so the book kind of charts a lot of those trends of how that resentment was displayed and like why there was so much resentment in the first place. And I think it goes beyond just the sort of natural tribal impulses of every human being. It relates to their what's called soteriology, so their doctrine of salvation, that it really comes down to being in the right club, and The Mormons certainly weren't in the right club because, and then there's all these really interesting reasons of, well, they're enthusiastic, and that means that they have too much personal spiritual experience, too many personal revelations that are destabilizing, and they don't just go straight to the Bible. They're having their own thing going on. Well, part of the reason that was so problematic for them is that almost every Protestant denomination has some level of enthusiasm in their past. Even the Methodists who were criticizing Joseph Smith when he came out with the first vision, saying, no, 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 that stuff doesn't happen anymore. Even just a few decades earlier, the early Wesleyan Methodists were having these raptured spiritual experiences and visions of Christ and stuff. And so it's like, it's a quickness to forget their own history, maybe, or wanting to distance themselves from their own history.
Or
And the Latter-day Saints just bring it into their face
right.
over and over and over again. Even polygamy is bringing things up from their past, like the Anabaptist revolt of the 1600s, which is wild if you look it up. But anyways,
Yeah, if I might just ask you a question, kind of give me your thoughts on this. And I'm sort of going to articulate this as I go, kind of thinking out loud here. But almost maybe I watched a video once. I think it was like the I can't remember the channel's name. It was like the Gen, like Gen Z. Like apologetics, Christian apologetics or whatever. And you can learn a lot through these channels in
mm-hmm.
terms of just like sort of what you described. I'll have to look it up later. But like a very intense, firm kind of coalition, of like here's what counts, here's what doesn't count, debating within themselves about like you know the need for certain types of works, the need for the sacraments and the sacrament of baptism and why that is essential or not. And this is so funny because it's the same line of thinking just extended to Latter-day
Mm-hmm.
Saints ordinances in terms of like why that does or doesn't count. But one of the things that this video did was just like crap on the Second Great Awakening. All these things. This came out of the Second Great Awakening. This came out like there seems to be a sort of resentment and pushback.
Mm.
Like the early 1800s, that time sucked. And what I think is really really interesting is that like we see that tension described in Joseph Smith's story. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we jump into his mind and here are the Presbyterians and the Methodists and the Baptists and the Catholics and whoever. They're all sort of at war with one another of sort of which is true and which isn't. And ironically, I do feel like well, you tell me if it's fair to say that sort of their worldview was galvanized as a response to not just Joseph Smith, but the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Adventists and like sort of these movements that are like, okay, well, we're not that, like you said, but particularly Joseph Smith because of our history, kind of moving from place to place and sort
Yeah.
of this almost traumatic, like we can never let something like that happen again. And so,
Yeah.
ironically, here's Joseph pushing against that tension, and it sort of makes me think of that saying that like one meets his destiny on the path to avoid it. Like the
Mm.
fact that here's Joseph trying to make sense of why they're all at odds with each other. And so then it's revealed to him like you need to restore what was. And ironically, in a sort of form of escalation, theological escalation, they galvanize together over time. And it's like, well, see, we're not all at odds. We're one body in Christ. It's like you were
Yeah.
at odds in the Second Great Awakening. Like you guys,
Yeah.
nope, this is the one true church. This is the one true church. And it's no question that somebody like Joseph Smith would kind of come to the conclusion, whether revealed or just kind of intuited or a combination of the two. Of course, what I believe is that it comes from God, but like kind of through the prism of his mind and revelation. That they're all wrong together, like all wrong together in the sense that like this is not the way, and the only response to that is to galvanize. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of see if that rang true to you, that ironically, because we go this direction, they solve the problem that is the basis of the restoration theology in the first place by all assimilating to one
Yeah.
another.
Yeah, and then the ultimate twist of fate is us trying to assimilate into that culture at the sort of beginning of the 20th century. But that's, we'll get to that momentarily. But yeah, I mean, I would think that Dr. Fluhman doesn't necessarily say it that way, but that's a core aspect of the central thesis of this book, A Peculiar People, is the Protestants, the majority Protestants, which are majority by identity, not by theological agreement,
Right.
but they're all
Which is
Protestants.
the point of the Second Great Awakening.
Exactly. And so they come together, not even necessarily like in a big council, the new Creed of Nicaea, we're going to say this is who's in, this is who's out. It's sort of just by evolution through the process of time and different events that take place, and saying, well, we're definitely not them, we're definitely not them, we're definitely not them. And it sort of forms this unification within the broader Protestant movement in America, to the point where Dr. Fluhman even says, especially toward the late 1800s, they have bar or I'm forgetting the idiom here. Like, by and large, here we go. They're by and large, they've stopped having these theological debates via paper, via essays and letters and things. And there's all kinds of them, like really intense theological debates between all of the different Protestant sects all through the 1800s. That slowly dips toward the end of the 1800s, and there could be all sorts of reasons for that. It could be the rise of industrial secularism and science, and then there's evolution and all this stuff coming together. But they're downplaying their theology and upplaying their identity, and this has political ramifications as well, because that starts to cohere into this more or less values unified body, which inevitably leads to a politically values unified body. And at first it was the Democratic Party, and then it shifts to become the Republican Party through the 20th century for a bunch of reasons, many of which I don't quite remember. It was later in the book, and I simply don't remember off the top of my head. But just really briefly, this gets to part of the reason why the majority Protestants just couldn't stand Latter-day Saints is they were actively engaged in politics. The Quakers and the Shakers weren't engaged in politics. They thought it was kind of beneath them. And the Adventists, from what I understand, they didn't really do this sort of group politicking. And plus, they only believed in the Bible. We had the Book of Mormon, so that was already a red flag. Like, whoa, this is really different. But then they'd show up in these towns, Latter-day Saint pioneers, and not like take over, but there's just so many of them that all of a sudden local elections can be swung one way or another. And the local people were not fans. And the majority Protestant imagination started taking these views of like, this is the Mormon invasion. They're invaders from the East. They're bringing these strange values that don't belong in our white America. They're not even white. It's like, what? These guys are English and Scandinavian immigrants. Like, but it's not about the skin color. It's about this sort of common American identity that counts as like good white Christian
Right.
American.
Right.
You have to agree with us.
I wonder if I can share real quick. Uh, let's see. I want to share some of these. You know what? Here. Keep talking. I'm gonna pull up. I'm gonna pull up some images from the time
Yeah,
to
yeah,
share
please
before.
do.
Um,
Some of those, especially some of those post polygamy memes, are
oh yeah,
just
yeah. I mean,
wild.
this is good stuff. This is well, and I remember as I'm pulling these up, I remember you talking about too that over time, what what the we can like sort of creedal Christians. Let's use Greg's term.
Mhm.
Creedal Christians because Catholics didn't belong in this group at the time either. And finally, there
Yeah.
was sort of a the universal church sort of grants salvation by extension of like this is good enough. We will take communion with you. Your baptism counts. And in reverse, the sort of let's call it the evangelical church, and we'll just use that term to kind of encompass all of Protestantism. And I know that's not quite accurate, but like sort of
Mhm.
the Protestant slash evangelical movement and the Catholic movement, and then Orthodox is kind of It's like, okay, we it was that bubble graph I sent you. I don't know where that is, where like Mormonism's like an amoeba way out here,
Yeah.
and everything else is this circle, and it's all touching, and and that like over time they found sort of theological excuses to let's see here, to like recognize the legitimacy of each other's theology, but that Latter-day Saints never ever even close to cut the mustard, which I'm not complaining about. I understand that. Like
Mhm.
we have so many theological differences. To say that it's not a an expression of Christianity is absurd. To sort of try to gatekeep like we are the body
Mhm.
of Christ, as but that's it. I
But
get it.
yeah, but to insert really briefly, that's always been the game. That's been the game from the very beginning, is the gatekeeping of identity. It's not
Yes,
about like
that's what I was getting
theological
at.
overlap.
Is today it's on all these theological bases of the Godhead, and will you reject the Trinity? You have the Book of Mormon, etc. Sola Scriptura. The Bible is all that counts, and I mean, we could go down the list of things. I know them too, and I agree. Like, yeah, these are radically different, but. You made the point when we were talking that has not always been the case. The reasons have shifted. It's
Hmm.
just that, like, at one point it was polygamy. Before that, it was political power. After that, it was like, well, we have to find something, kind of demonstrating that, like, at its core, this goes a lot further than any particular set of doctrinal identifiers. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because you kind of showed me how the reasoning has swapped out, and it's really just on the basis of identity.
Yeah, I mean, A Peculiar People really just does such a phenomenal job of demonstrating this arc through history. And then I think it picks up with another book by the name of Jesus and John Wayne, which is a different book. It doesn't address Latter Day Saints basically at all. I think it references Mormons like twice, and it's in very specific context. It's not about Latter Day Saints, but it is about right wing evangelicalism, and so you can kind of follow this thread through A Peculiar People starting in the early 1800s, working its way through American history, bridging into Jesus and John Wayne all the way through into the 21st century. And I think that it gives this pretty clear snapshot of sort of what happened, where for the Latter-day Saints especially, it was first, they're not a religion at all. It's just a
Right.
fraud. Joseph Smith is a fraud. So
Right.
that's like Mormonism Unveiled and all of these very early critical texts, where it's like it's not about what they believe. It's just Joseph Smith is clearly a fraud. Here's all these reasons why. He's a crook, he's a money digger, etc., etc. And then it moves into just by the fact that they won't go away and they keep growing. Though there's just more Latter Day Saint converts all the time. It's like, well, then I guess it's a false religion. It's sort of like the Muslims, and then people figure out they're practicing polygamy out there in the West, and then
They're
it's
like,
really like the Muslims, and we can't have that. It's defiled our American sanctity, and so that becomes a problem. And then it eventually becomes they are like a fallen religion. This is after the polygamy manifesto. They stop practicing polygamy. Um, it's a little easier to say, well, you can stay, I guess, but you're still not one of us. And here's why. And then come the theological debates. And really, before that, before late 1800s, early 1900s, there's really not a lot of theological debate with Latter day Saint ideas. It's just
right.
sort of these assertions or historical claims, ethnic claims, all these things. And then finally, the theology comes online right as the theology debates between the Protestant sects go down, which I think is also really interesting. And then evangelicalism is the subject of Jesus and John Wayne. And
Yeah. Tell me about that shift a little bit.
yes,
Hold on, I do finally have a couple of cartoons here that I can share. So next time I will have to grant all the permissions. It will only let me
Oh.
share a Chrome tab. Um, but yeah, we've got some good ones of the Moctopus here. Here he is.
Hmm.
I love the Moctopus. He's just seizing upon and taking all the wives, and this scary
Hmm.
man. You know what's interesting while I'm pulling it up, Jake, is some of the issues that are so misunderstood and were so criminalized by here it is, by Protestants and evangelicals. Now you get these. Now you kind of get the strain within a sort of evangelical Mormonism, like, how do I put this? Like schism, where and I know we'll talk more about this, and we're gonna get there, but like with the issues with you've seen the craziness of what Tim Ballard's doing, right? Where
Oh
he's
yeah.
deep
Uh-huh.
church, and
Yeah.
Candace Owens, and uh Mark Driscoll, and sort of this suspicion that like Mormonism, there's something sinister, and you've got Latter-day Saints, particularly in the sort of conspiratorial thinking uh, way, that wants so badly to assimilate with this group that they're essentially a form of Latter-day Saint evangelicalism, which they'll never accept with the Book of Mormon. But now they're in kind of this. It's like the institutional assimilating where we're realizing didn't really work that well. And so here the church is now kind of drifting past that. They're like, wait, we were almost there.
Yeah.
Quick, here, let me share some of these so I can
Hmm.
finally share my screen here. So here's the. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Here's the
There's a
mock.
good old Brigham.
Yep, yep. So he's grabbing everybody. He's taking all power, and like this was largely the issue. By the way, I don't
Oh,
necessarily.
look at that, reaching over to Ireland to bring over
Yep.
those poor, slummy Irish immigrants in our Anglo-American utopia.
And to the extent we got some criticism on our video, that like with me in particular, kind of calling for moderation and calling for independent thinking of any kind of party. um,
Hmm.
and I had to kind of like explain this over and over again in the video, and I'll say it again now. I am not calling for Latter-day Saints to be apolitical. I'm not calling for Latter-day Saints
Hmm.
to sort of, it's like, well, you can't vote for anybody righteous, as I put that in the comments too, Hiram Smith, basically saying it's a sin to write to vote for somebody who's wicked. And you get all of this squirming, and it's like, oh, if that even sounds slightly against the right wing wave, and it's like, that's not what I'm suggesting. I'm not suggesting being apolitical or neutral. I'm suggesting being much more political, but like understanding that Latter-day Saints had a lot more power when they went to the beat of their own drum. But there's a risk, and the risk is this. And if you don't
Hmm.
think that we would see something like this again, in terms of like what are the Mormons up to, if you don't think that Mitt Romney voting against the club, and or Jeff Flake like pushing against the issues that they see as like inherently at odds with their Latter-day Saint theology, and suddenly that makes them a rhino rather than somebody voting their conviction. And if you don't think that that's connected to any kind of undercurrent of the Mormon problem, or narcissist Tim grabbing whatever he can find with the deep church, you are
Hmm.
sorely mistaken. And like this right here that we're looking at is the undercurrent, that I'm
Yeah.
I'm positive we would see more of. So let's see.
And an undercurrent that really is very old, that goes right
Yeah.
back to the inception of the church itself and has never gone away.
Yep. Here's some more. Let me just share some more real quick while we're talking about this. And I just think that these are important to understand, that that like this isn't very long ago, and that memory is short. Can you see this okay? You see
Yeah,
Mormon.
while the watchman sleeps. The crocodile of
What's
Mormonism.
so crazy is that Latter-day Saints, even today, would get behind this kind of satire, knowing, like, for another group, for any other group, right? This isn't some loaded thing. I can pick one. Let's just say Islam, or something. And like I get it. There are tensions and there are worldview, differences between cultures, and like that's understandable. But that Latter-day Saints would get on the sort of bandwagon, thinking that they're on the bandwagon, not understanding that they are means to an end, and we always
They're
have
the
been.
useful
Always.
idiots.
Yes, that's right. So while the watchman sleeps, let's see. Let's see what else we got here. This is one of my favorites. Okay, so here's Uncle Sam stepping on these snakes. The
Mormon
only sure
vermin.
way. And there's the tabernacle, the uh, the Mormon vermin nest, right? We
That's
have all
definitely extermination order vibes.
we have all these discussions about musket fire rhetoric and whether or not
Mhm.
that's appropriate. And I just want to remind everyone that, after a horrible incident of a truck bearing American flags and ultra, you know, uh, political religious motivations, which we know are the motivations, and everyone like scrambling like we don't know. It's like we know. And here is some of that kind of rhetoric, a little more pointed, I think, a little more a little less rhetorical, I guess we could
Yeah.
say.
Back when it was less of a taboo in the majority culture.
Yeah, that's right. Let's see. Hold on. There's another one I want to find that's just awful. Um, oh yeah, here's a class. So this is before the Catholics were in the club. You've got the Roman Church and the Mormon, the Tabor turtle, I like to call them. So there's the
Mhm.
octopus and the Tabor turtle, and I think these make great memes. Personally, I would like to summon
I
them.
like that turtle. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I would summon these for a battle. I
That'd be
summoned the
awesome.
Tabor turtle. Oh yeah, here it is. Polygamy. Michelle Stone, I hope, sees this someday.
Mm.
Michelle, you can use these. You can use these political cartoons to your advantage. I think. Uh, maybe we can stamp out the snakes. Um, ooh, yeah. Here we go. Take a good hard look. Uncle Sam's troublesome bedfellows. While we're looking at his troublesome bedfellows, Jake, why don't we talk a little bit about the racial ramifications of early Mormonism and religion of a different color?
Some of the stuff I had never even heard of about. I mean, I'd heard glances of it, but not the examples of the truly the racialization depictions of Latter-day Saints in political cartoons is like kind of greenish skin color, floppy hair. There's sort of effete and like wimpy walking around because that's what polygamy does to a man, and you lose your vigor and vitality, and so it's
Bigger.
definitely a racial othering. Absolutely. Which is
Well,
just so fascinating that that's immediately where the hyper racialized society of that sort of just before Civil War, through the Civil War, right after Civil War, that time period in American history, of course, that's where they go because that is like on everybody's mind all the time. I have to imagine is this sort of racial frameworks to understand like
yes.
the mankind and their destiny.
That was part of that like separation, right? Is it's so troublesome to
Hmm.
this um to this sort of mainline majority of Protestants, of American Protestants,
Hmm.
that through the sort of eugenics, like uh I don't know, like a sort of eugenics mentality. We have to other the Latter-day Saints in some feasible way, and they cannot share in whiteness. And this is the part. It's Paul Reeve who's done the deep dive, and it's no excuse for our own, as a culture, our own participation in racism, but it's a very different kind. It's sort of this desperate need to maintain whiteness, which we have those problems, and how to navigate them and interpret them already in scripture, and how scripture is interpreted, but it evolves to become a sort of the text justifies the clamoring for whiteness. And why does this happen? Because what we see here, where and there's an even better cartoon that demonstrates it. But yeah, look, like Uncle Sam's got to get all the minorities out of here. And it's funny that Latter-day Saints even today still don't understand their history as a completely othered religious minority, kind of wanting to claim, we're part of the in group. This is the worst. This is the other one that's just awful. Let's see. Mormon elderberry out with his 6-year-olds who take after their mothers. So the idea here being,
miscegenation.
yes, that's right. Like that they would dare to, uh, intermingle and intermarry with these other races. Look at these awful depictions, and like the Latter-day Saint. I mean, I've never thought of it this way before, Jake, but it only just now struck me. Is like the Latter-day Saint caricature always had this long beard, and as if all throughout
Interesting.
time did not have these long beards. And David O. McKay and the modern, the modernization of Mormonism and really trying to become a global church and an American friend, and suddenly we do away with beards. We do away with them aggressively. We do away with them in a way that becomes almost ridiculous, and it's a response, of course, to the counterculture. We know that it's rooted in something, and needing to be clean cut and organized, and like the model minority maybe. But this response feels pointed as we see the part of the aspect of the race. There's the Moctopus taking all the women.
Those darn women that wouldn't let the
Right.
U.S. Protestants save them. Why won't they let us save
Yeah,
them?
why are
Don't they know they're oppressed?
Young must secretly be controlling. Never mind that he can't even get his own people to, accept some of his opinions. Here's the detachment of 400 Mormon women, 500 women in favor of polygamy. Right? So this is what happened. The Great Indignation Meeting, as our friend Celine will note. It's just crazy, Jay. Like people don't know this aspect of the history and the correspondence as they're meeting, sending Reed Smoot, going, "What are we going to do?" And then of course there's George Buchanan who makes the calculated choice to politically assimilate and align.
Yeah.
So anyway, not
Polygamy in particular, not to spend too much time on it, is interesting because it's like it goes against Victorian era romantic sensibilities really hard, but it really doesn't go against Christian history in the broadest sense if you extend it back into the Old Testament.
right.
Um, and there's all sorts of people who say like, well, the Romans were monogamous, and then the breaking up of the clans with the Catholic Church, that's how the West rose to power, was through monogamy. And it's like, yeah, okay, these are all sociological explanations, and they're very interesting, and I'm sure there's truth to them. But in terms of just the pure vitriol, like this could never be accepted by God, ever. It's like, are you sure? I don't know if never ever is the right adverb to put in that sentence, because it certainly used to be accepted, and it's kind of a human universal anthropologically. And I don't know, I think it's kicking against one's own history maybe a little bit. On the creedal Christian side, it's like maybe distancing themselves from the Jews a little bit, since they're the ones in charge of the Old Testament.
Right.
I don't know, that's just a little crackpot theory of mine.
No, I mean, I think there is some element to, um, it's just human nature. Um, we get very upset by mirrors, kind of sociological mirrors of ourselves. In that it's like, and we do it as Latter-day Saints. We hold. And like I would stand by this, but I would stand by it on the same basis that I would stand by, like, yeah, no, we're not the same thing as creedal Christians. I don't think we are. I think those boundaries are useful, just like I think those boundaries are useful with fundamentalism. But like it's like we're not fundamentalism. And President Hinckley essentially being like, don't call yourselves Mormon, until we pivoted away. And that's actually one of the things I think is useful about defining Latter-day Saint, because there's no world where fundamentalism isn't a valid expression of the restorationist Mormon umbrella. It is. It's a type of Mormonism, just like we're a type of Christianity. And for the record, I don't even believe fundamentalism is a valid expression of a bygone era. I don't think any kind of fundamentalism ever is. It remembers a false history on the basis of its retrenchment and its like hyper responsiveness to modernity and to things changing. It's the same way with Islam, right? Like it's, the most extreme expressions of it are not harking back to any history that we know of where that's the ideal. However, they bring up points that we don't really want to look at, which is like, well, but what about this? And it's like, that did happen. And we're negotiating with it differently. And so we get very, very aggravated when it's like, don't represent us that way. That's not true. We've denounced that, or we've moved on from that, or that was misunderstood. And I think that's partly why I think Mormonism growing out of the Second Great Awakening, which was so, filled with so much fervor and so much like excitement for Christ and for the Bible, and it being a very natural, expression of this. And it like dealing in consecration and having no poor and united order and polygamy. These things are frustrating because they are genuine reflections of what you can find in the Bible. I remember at Ralston when we showed the angel, and there was a little bit of a frustrated response on the basis that like we would even include polygamy in a piece of art. The one thing nobody could respond to is, it's like, okay, how is this like, how is a fable or a story like this not biblical? We're not even making a statement for or against. We're just exploring it. And it's like, what do you tear those pages out of the Bible? How do you make sense of that? It's sort of leveraging the New Testament against the Old as hard as it can, and yet they have to take the Old Testament, just like we have to take all the standard works and sort of reconcile them and create a sort of univocality. So anyway, yeah, I think that sometimes the rage is filled with a sort of familiarity. I think this is the same reason that there's so much disdain within conservative Christianity for Islam. It's not because it's a different religion. You don't see so much anger against Hinduism, but it's because it's like, well, these are the same characters and this is the same history. It's this a sort of purported sameness of God.
Yeah, I think the geographical proximity also adds to that, where it's like they were constantly invading each other back and forth, the Muslims and the Christians through the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and stuff, whereas the Hindus, they
That's a
were
good
like
point.
thousands of miles away. Not irrelevant, but to them, essentially a non-issue. It's not posing any threat to them, and
What about today,
they're
though, is what I
very.
mean. Like the American Christian, like,
Yeah, yeah, I see what you. I mean, I think that carries over, though. I think that cultural baggage carries over. Personally, I don't think that history has gone away,
yeah.
and I think you see that now with the Muslim immigrants coming into Western Europe. It's like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
la new reconquista. Woohoo! Okay, all right, yeah. Whoa.
So I know that was a little bit of a tangent, but I wanted to touch on that era and how much that has trickled down. So we've talked about like, you know, polygamy and or theological differences, but keep walking us through that history and how it evolves into the to the Jesus and John Wayne segment.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and go through some of my notes here. I'm
Please.
looking to see if there's any relevant quotations about that. Yeah, this is actually a pretty good quote that I think is worth going over, and then we can chat about it.
You can read
So
all
this
these.
is from A Peculiar People.
Yeah, please keep diving into that.
Yeah, so the quote is, Christians had long sought a balance between formalistic, so essentially what it sounds like, the sort of strict forms of religiosity, the ritual and the scripture, the theologian, these are all formalistic expressions of religion. And enthusiastic religiosity, that's Joseph Smith in the Sacred Grove. I mean, it's just the pinnacle example of what that means. Or speaking in tongues, which was another thing that the Protestants hated that the Latter-day Saints did all through their history up until, I mean, I don't even know when that stopped. Probably the turn of into the 1900s, or
It
maybe
was,
before that.
that was
It was
earlier.
probably before that.
Yeah.
I can't remember. But anyways, let me restart that quote. Christians had long sought a balance between formalistic and enthusiastic religiosity along a fictive spectrum that ranged from disbelief to hyperbelief, and Mormons functioned for antebellum Americans at the far end of both sides of the gambit. More to the point, Mormonism provided the image against which Protestants could patrol their imagined community. Given their raucous theological and ecclesiastical diversity, early Republic Protestants had an easier time identifying what they were not. Positioned just beyond the revival's enthusiasm or the skeptics' practical atheism, Mormonism ironically numbered most of its committed opponents among the evangelicals. So
Yeah.
there's more here I can touch on.
Please do it. Yeah, you should.
Yeah, why not? Why not? I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to another highlighted section.
Okay.
Because the saints' spiritual powers had become associated with radical religion, mental illness, and social upheaval, non-Mormons interpreted their religious practice as a menace rather than a unique version of Christian gospel. That's another thing is that Latter-day Saints, not only were they said they were not white, but they were first, before that, they were said they were insane. That especially the Mormon women were like losing their minds. And
Well,
it's
that's what you have to say when you don't like what somebody thinks,
yeah,
and then you think,
yeah.
how on earth would they think this way? I don't think this
No
way.
sane and rational person could ever.
And we still hear that.
Mm-hmm. So, and in response, the Mormons alternately trumpeted and suppressed their gifts. Increasingly, Mormons and their detractors agreed that the Latter-day Saints were a people set apart, so much so that critics would almost always adopt more alien analogs for the faith than the radical enthusiasts of the Protestant margins themselves.
Okay,
So,
so to understand that, it's like a better analog is going to be the quote Mohammedan than
yeah.
say the really enthusiastic um,
Mhm.
uh, Protestant expression, which is so funny now because Latter-day Saints have become so maybe uh, practical in the expression of their faith that I know, at
Mhm.
least for me, maybe for you, growing up, there's a sort of chortling about the other faiths that speak in tongues or handle snakes or whatever. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, how crazy is that? And it's like here earlier, you've got Latter-day Saints
Mhm.
having their own version of this, not just, hama lama laba, this idea that there's translation and that God has this pure language and that it's been distilled and that was just insane to these people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Keep
It's
going.
true.
I'm looking at these highlighted sections, and I think they're not too many, and they're enough to kind of qualify maybe what
Yeah,
we're.
I think it'll be good. This one I read on Greg's podcast, and I think this is a really good little snapshot of the political vitriol in the United States toward the Latter-day Saints. So, um, I'll start from the beginning of this one. Though he had been friendly to the Mormons in Illinois, Stephen Douglas turned on the Saints when his popular sovereignty doctrine, not to mention his presidential aspirations, seemed imperiled. Speaking in Illinois in 1857, he presented himself as having been duped by the Mormons. Who could have known that Mormons would be guilty of anything other than religious peculiarities? Given the field reports, he continued, it seemed that the exercise the right. Oh, my apologies. It seemed that the inhabitants of Utah, as a community, are outlaws and alien enemies, unfit to exercise the right of self-government. Congress should apply the knife and cut out the loathsome, disgusting ulcer. The ulcer being the Latter-day Saints, just to
Yeah.
make that connection
Yeah.
as clear as I possibly can after having just come from Missouri and the extermination order. Here they are in Utah, and it's like, no, no, no. You got to cut out the ulcer.
Right.
Now, well, here's another one. This one is about Mormonism as fake religion. I'll just read a highlighted section. Mormonism, in short, blurred lines between the real and the counterfeit, magic and religion and faith and politics, challenging the definition of Christianity in the new nation, given the attachments Americans felt to a Christian or Protestant republic. Mormonism's allegedly fraudulent Christianity crossed too many cultural and religious norms for comfort.
But
So,
on the basis of a restorationist biblical Christianity, that's my point.
mhm,
It's a
yeah.
mirror. On one of those little online meme debates I got in, somebody finally gave up because he couldn't identify whether I was an atheist or a Latter-day Saint, and I was trying to kind of call him on the carpet a little bit because it's like
Mhm.
they have to code switch, right? It's like with the atheists,
Mm.
they have to justify all the same kind of apologetics work that Latter-day Saints have to do, and then for the Latter Day Saint, it's like, oh, Garden of Eden's in Missouri, lols. How crazy is that? I'm sorry, what was that? You believe in a literal Garden of Eden, right? With a talking magical snake and these two magical trees that get. It's like,
Mhm.
which is it, guys? Like I'm sorry, I think just the magic garden, no matter where it is a little bit harder to stand behind, and even though they try to punch down on Mormonism for its presumed absurdity. Ironically, it is Latter Day Saint doctrine, particularly early Latter Day Saint doctrine, that provides the sort of fluidity to navigate and interpret these things. However, they need to be interpreted. It's Brigham Young that taught that the rib thing is a metaphor and that is figurative. That used to even be in the temple, and and that like we're really not that concerned if somebody interprets to what extent these things are figurative or literal, or they're kind of both, um, because we have the precedent for that, with Christ coming and saying, "Oh, you thought I was going to be a political Messiah, but I'm really a spiritual Messiah," and like. I think that you have this tension of the literalism of the plates and Joseph Smith and really kind of a literal theology, but like that stuff's interesting and it's fun, and the point is that like Latter-day Saint theology and philosophy allow for that navigation. If you read any sort of like BYU studies essay or Maxwell Institute, and it ebbs and flows, and we've had these different approaches, and that's a different video for a different day. Kind of the war within of what qualifies as literalist kind of Latter-day Saint canon theology. But my point is that we can even have that discussion because there are such guardrails around sort of not that that doesn't exist within the rest of Christianity. I know it does, but it's like the Garden of Eden is in Missouri, LOL, is so stupid. It's just the stupidest.
To
Like
me, it's just the ultimate. You can't have your cake and eat it too.
that's
Where it's like,
exactly, yeah.
no, 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 no. How dare you, atheists, say there wasn't a literal Garden of Eden? And how dare you, Mormons, say the Garden of Eden wasn't literally between the
Somewhere.
Tiber and the Euphrates, or the Tigris and the Euphrates, or whatever it is in Genesis? I can't remember. It's like, Missouri? What? Missouri didn't even exist, dude. The state was like, 18 something or other.
Well, and then like at other places, Joseph Smith teaching that the Garden of Eden was the whole earth, or that Zion is all of North and South America. That it's like, where can things have sort of multiple meanings and messianic dual meaning? I'm sure I've heard that before somewhere. I think I've heard that before. Where has this been like, oh yeah, it's kind of about King whoever, but it's also about Christ. It's like, come on, guys, like for real. Ahaz or Amos or whatever. I can't remember who it is in Isaiah, but like
Mhm.
and it's nonsense. I don't think we need to go down that road because it's performative. It's identity politics a little bit.
Yeah, that is a vein of sort of scriptural identity, literalism, all that stuff that I do want to get into eventually, not today, but with the sort of Watching on the Tower book and Ben Spackman's thesis and this sort of what the heck is going on there between 1930 and 1950, 60, and what happens to the sort of internal church culture.
But Jake,
Um,
it's all on the basis of what we're talking about today.
it
It is
is. That's what I'm saying. It's all
all
interrelated.
assimilative, desperate, this age old war. It's kind of like I didn't quite say this on Greg's um, podcast. I think I inferred it, but it's like, look, do Latter-day Saints have a complicated and very fraught history with the secular left? let's say. Of course, absolutely. And we're going to continue to. And
And not without good reasons,
oh yeah,
clearly.
absolutely. And also every religion does and will, so long as it's actually being engaged with on these, like, ancient kind of structures and principles. And we've talked about this, but Jonathan Haidt, The Righteous Mind, digs into this, and that there's a tension there. You need it. I'm not suggesting that we're somehow, as a movement, really safer or more aligned. Although I said that as sort of a party and identity, really specifically, because there are all kinds of um, ideologies that are far more, like, let's say, left than right in the traditional sense in Latter-day Saint doctrine and culture. And I think that's why people find those reasons. It's why you have right wing and left wing Latter-day Saints pointing at each other, being like, no way you can have a temple recommend if, it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
okay,
you're
well,
studying the wrong gospel, but it's
right,
like it's both the right gospel at either side, and it's finding a
exactly.
way to integrate those viewpoints together.
That's right. On science and on medicine and on, the like, uh, uh, qualified experts, and on cities and on urban development and on architecture and on immigration and on the poor and on fiscal ideals. Like, there's no question. It's all there, baked in the scriptures. But I'm not going to pretend that on gender or family or uh, like the state versus the church, that Latter-day Saints don't have a great, point to make, and kind of have to stand alone. But it's not that group. It is not that group that has historically been sort of the arch enemy of the Latter-day Saint in trying to ostracize at best, exterminate at worst. And we're seeing expressions of this, and it's going to come back. So I'd love for you to keep reading these quotes, but I think this is why this is so important to hit,
Yeah,
because anything else we're ever going to talk about, in some way or another, in my opinion, can be traced back to this tension
yeah,
within, too, of our need to fit in and our need to be accepted, even if we've forgotten where it came from, or why it exists in the first place.
yeah, yeah. I mean, absolutely. That's why we're doing this. We can do it.
That's right. Oh, this next quote is, I think,
I know this next one's really long. I'm debating. I think I'm just going to read the highlighted portions,
okay. Yeah.
and then we'll go from there. Maybe I'll reread some sections. But so, anyways, it starts off: modern Mormons are offended by the suggestion that they are not Christians, but they are often unprepared to respond to the charge. And skipping down, young evangelicals, intrigued or disgusted by Mormonism, have often had more exposure to the 19th century themes than their Mormon counterparts. And then skipping down again, immersion in the Book of Mormon and the revelations of the 1830s has brought Mormons unavoidably to Christocentric salvation. So that being that, like, Christ is the central figure to salvation, not works or not any other sort of practice. It's all through Christ's grace. And so that aligns us a lot more with Protestants, theologically speaking. But there's still so much tension there already that it's like,
Well, and that
you
point that
guys don't believe in grace or whatever because you get baptized or whatever the sort of the qualm is, because we still have ordinances, sacraments.
the fact that young evangelicals have had more exposure to the 19th century themes, I think that's true. I think that's a stupid and tragic choice on our part. That in the spirit of a living theology and in the spirit of a living church, we just move on. It's like, don't look back, don't talk about it. I think that started as a way of survival, and then it became something that, unto the third and fourth generation, let's say, we no longer knew. We no longer, the Pharaoh no longer knew Joseph, and in the same sense, we no longer knew Joseph in the sort of proverbial sense, where it's like, what were they up to? What were they taught? We don't recognize it anymore in Rings of Power. Did you watch Rings of Power?
I never did. No.
In the second season, I like it. I know JD, who is one of the showrunners, and the second season I think was better than the first. But in the second season, there is a group of kind of proto hobbits they wander, and that's like how they identify themselves. Is they're like, we're wanderers. We go from place to place. We move around, and a couple of these proto hobbits find these like desert hobbits that are the same species as them, and they like have a city and they're built, and they're like, why are you here? And they're like, oh, we like, this is how we live. And like they have this like tapestry or this carving or something, and they're like, I think maybe you're tied to this thing. And they're like, how can you have a city? We're wanderers. That's what we do. And they find this like tapestry, and it demonstrates that like at the beginning their group just like got lost. They like left and couldn't find their way back, and suddenly they defined themselves by being wanderers, and they forgot why they were wandering in the first place. And I think that in some sense it's like, yes, I get it, like, pertinent to salvation, living church, that doesn't matter anymore, but these things do functionally matter in a lived society. And also, what about gathering all things in one? What about restoring all things and understanding the great whole of all truth? And I really legitimately don't know if we're equipped to move forward without looking into the past, without reclaiming it, without renegotiating with it, and circumscribing it into a great whole, which is kind of why we were making the point that we were. How sad when an evangelical does know from a limited perspective a little bit more about your history, and then we're backed up to the wall of faith, right, and just testify of the Book of Mormon. And it's like, that is sufficient for a testimony, and maybe in bringing the Spirit, that is not sufficient to resolve a legitimate academic question.
Yeah. 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 That particular example I think is really interesting because, at least on my mission, maybe it was the same for you. We were explicitly told, don't Bible bash. It's not going to produce the fruits of the Spirit. And it's like, here it is. Here's these two forks in the road where on one hand, it's true. If there's a lot of contention in the room and you guys are just debating cerebrally whether or not certain,
No,
what'd you say?
yeah, sorry, no other God and stuff. It's
Yeah. So it's like whether these particular verses in the Bible contradict each other and which one wins and all those things. It's like, that's not going to do anybody any good. And there is a necessary road that has to be trod as the other group to demonstrate like what the heck is going on with our thought processes and why we believe what we believe. And it can't just be sentimentalism. It can't just be, I feel it, ergo it's true, because
right.
that gets you into some crazy positions when taken to its extreme, as it often is.
It is
And
right now with like this
yes.
week with DNC 132 and the barrage on social media of not even engaging with this thing historically and in the right context and from the voices of the people who lived it. Only Emma Smith, because it's like, oh, I guess she's the only woman who ever lived. And then navigating it on the basis of, it doesn't feel like God, it doesn't feel right. And it's this like, what is this? Like nobody is calling to re-implement this thing. This is hundreds of years in the past, or at least 100. And yet it will never go away if we don't understand how to talk about it and defend it in principle, because it's never going to go away, because it's in the Bible already. We already have this problem. And you can't just make an argument of like, well, it just doesn't feel like something God would do. It's like, I'm sorry. Have we taken a really close look at our scriptures? Like,
Yeah.
not everything's a mistranslation. It can't all
What
be a
what
mistranslation.
now I'm forgetting something. What is it that Abraham was commanded to do to
Right.
his son
Oh, but I mean,
Isaac?
I have a relative that made this case. I just saw this case by somebody being made on a really prominent cultural Latter-day Saint organization and channel, which is that's so funny you say that, Jake. Eventually you reverse engineer until it's just like, God would never ask that. and like, you know, that like Abraham was projecting his trauma about almost being sacrificed by his dad, and like God
Mm.
wouldn't ask somebody to go through or feel something like that. And I mean, it's just like, okay, let's talk about what God allows implicitly, just by existence, just by like
Mm.
the problem of suffering. And if that's not the most privileged, like desperate kind of, uh, I don't know, like modernist sheltered approach, then at the end of the day, it's sort of like what President Holland has talked about, where it's just like you've got this grandfatherly God that isn't equipped to handle real things or reality or suffering or sacrifice or
Mm.
these principles, which yes are brutal and also primal and also the structure for all of life and culture, and like you're going to run into them in sociology, you're going to run into them in history, you're going to run into them in anthropology, and it's like it's not going anywhere. I hope I'm making sense, at least to
No,
you.
I think that definitely makes sense. Yeah, yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. Yeah, God, I mean, these are the conversations we've been wanting to have for a long time to put out there. Hopefully, some people watch this.
If it's just,
It'll get better every week.
at least
Just
we've
you
said
wait,
it.
guys.
Okay, well, what about these other quotes? I promise I'll stop going off on these rants here. I need to
No, no, no,
you
no, no.
talk.
I wanna hear the rants. Let me see here.
Yeah,
So
this.
this quote is relevant to what we were talking about with like ethnic weirdness in religion. Um, trying to see if I should continue down this quote. I think I might.
Do
If you
it.
guys are all right with
I'm
that.
reading along with you. I'm on the dock, so
Yeah.
it's great.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and go down the full one on this one because I think it's really
Okay.
relevant.
Okay.
So this is about Mormon Orientalism. Anti-Mormon hostility unquestionably gained momentum as commentators discovered or inflated the Oriental or Asiatic character of Mormon life. Mormonism was hardly an imported or foreign tradition. Um, I must have missed something on the quote there. Something demonstrates how central the perception of cultural deviation has been in the maintenance of homegrown religious variety. The persistent and still lingering problem of categorizing Mormonism reveals as much about American negotiations of religion's conceptual boundaries as it does about Mormon belief or practice. The increasingly scientific study of religion cut in another direction, caught between older understandings of religion that were essentially logical or
Theology.
theological, my apologies, and newer ones that countenanced the possibility of non Christian religion. Late century Mormonism found itself in a period of general uncertainty and taxonomic indeterminacy. Just briefly, taxonomy being basically the family tree and naming system of how religions or plants or animals, etc., are related to each other.
Right.
Taxonomic indeterminacy, but one that has worked toward the gradual inclusion of previously marginalized religious groups at a place at the table of American religions, and it depended as much on the nation's acquiescence to less theological conceptualizations of religion as on Mormon renunciation of polygamy. So it's this interesting double pole where the majority Protestant nation is having to downplay theological differences, and the Mormons are having to get rid of polygamy entirely. It's too much of a spur. And then we can start talking about things generally, and
But
the conversation kind of
not just
never
to be
stops.
accepted by Christians as a theology,
Oh no.
to exist
Yes,
at all.
exactly. To
It's
exist as a
we
theology.
don't do that, then we as a culture and group are going to come find you and drag you all to prison. And that's why that everyone's like, oh, the church is a corporation. It's a corporation, not a church. It's like, do you know why?
Mhm.
It's because it was basically dissolved. The government's like, nope, you don't exist anymore, and
Mhm.
it had to scoop itself back together. I just think that's really those power dynamics and power imbalances and sort of the Stockholm syndrome relationship that we have has to be stated, and it has to be stated loudly, which it's not just like, oh no, you have to get rid of polygamy if you're going to be Christian. It's like you have to get rid of polygamy if you're going to exist. So
Mhm.
anyway, keep going.
Yeah, yeah, and I think along with that, just oh yes. So another thing I thought of is I think it really puts into perspective why the church randomly has this $140 billion rainy day fund just
That's way
sitting
more.
there.
I think it's
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure it's way more than that. Or that was the last number that I remember, but it's been a while.
that's
I'm
like
sure
double.
it's really big. But it's like, people see that as corruption or greed or what have you. And I look at it and I see it as like, we need to have some bulwarks in place because people don't like to leave us alone, and we want to have some shielding for if the government attacks the church's structure. And do you have the money for the suits, and do you have the money to start other organizations and splinter and do whatever you need to do to survive? It's
Yeah,
that
because we've learned.
impulse to survive.
Yes, we've learned that culturally. President Nelson was over 100 years old. It's like half the age of he's born, a few decades after the Salt Lake Temple's done, and um, and this quorum has a long memory. It might not necessarily have a super long memory theologically, and that's why you have these developments where you've got um, Elder McConkie and President Kimball and this quorum kind of battling this earlier Brigham Young quorum and those dynamics, and all they're left with is the tradition that's been inherited. They're not historians, but they do have a long memory in terms of persecution, and conversely, it's part of our theology. We expect this to happen. We know it's going to happen, and because it's happened once, and because it's part of our theology, we expect it to happen again. And so and look, it is happening. It's starting to happen. I feel like a crazy guy having said a few years ago, to my friends and family members, it's gonna happen. We're not in the in group, and so it's going to occur. And it's like, Jake, it's like watching something starting to go over a waterfall, and people sort of trying to negotiate with it. It's like, well, this is bad. We gotta call. It's like, guys. Anyway,
Yeah. I mean, I remember having those conversations with you years ago when we both still lived in Utah, and we'd go on these long night walks and talk about it. Like, man, things are crazy in one way,
we're gonna get
but
caught in the
the
middle.
backlash is going to be so much worse, and it seems to be. So,
And we didn't ask to be caught in the middle, and just somehow we are.
yeah.
Somehow we're placed there. I think probably by virtue also of our theology itself, which demands something higher than this. Than the sort of political coalition madness, and maybe means and ends.
Mhm.
So anyway, you weren't done with
Yeah.
the,
Well, something brief. I
oh, yeah.
think I think that just that conflict, the political conflict, and what Jonathan Haidt's work reveals about the political conflict, that it's pretty much just people of different personality profiles warring it out verbally because they value fundamentally different things,
Right.
largely based on their biology,
Yeah.
like just from the traits they were born with, and that coupled with whatever circumstances they grew up with. Like, it wasn't really a choice. Oh, I'm going to be this far left Democrat, and he's going to be this far right Republican. It's more just like these are the propensities that people are born with, personality and axiology wise. Axiology meaning like the values that you place below your decision making. And so there's a natural sort of statistical distribution that people will segregate in these certain ways. And in a two-party system, you get something like the Republicans and the Democrats every time, which is skewing one for, what's it? It's not conservatism, it's conscientiousness, and
Hmm.
the other for openness to experience.
Right.
And it's like, it's not that there's not overlap, not that there's not, all these caveats, insert caveats here, but by and large, political parties are a manifestation of largely biological differences in personality. And Jonathan Haidt establishes this very well in The Righteous Mind and other works. So what does that mean? The implications of that is that the perspectives of either party are irrevocably half. They cannot see the whole truth
Right.
of any situation.
Yep.
They are partial,
Yep.
and they're partial in very predictable ways. And so if you are a member of a church that, at least on paper, wants to circumscribe all truth into one great whole, then I don't think that we can identify. This is what I was trying to get on Greg's podcast and say, we can't identify with either party. You can pledge allegiance, so to speak, to a particular party for political purposes. That's just part of being in a republic. Like you have to say, I'm going to vote for this person. And in a two-party first past the poll system, this is what we get, is a two-party system. There's just no other way around it. It's the incentives construct the two-party system. So those are our choices. However, to say that I am a Democrat, I am a MAGA Republican, in this identification with the party platform at the expense of the other aspects of truth that you're leaving behind that are within your own faith, but they're not within the political party. I think that we have to be very, very careful with that.
Or a Benson Republican, right?
Yeah.
Like
yeah, absolutely.
The natural strains that kind of go the ways that they do, and the negotiations that we've made. I mean, we've grown up with this, and any Latter-day Saint would understand, any American Latter-day Saint would understand kind of the older opinion that it's like, can you really be a Democrat and and like I, on one side of my family they were all Republicans, and on the other they were Democrats. And like on the Democrat side of my family, that grandfather was a bishop and a patriarch, and like and there is this old tension and negotiation, and like whatever his Democratic allegiance or party was, in being a librarian and reading dialogue at the time and what dialogue was, and engaging with history. You've got Eugene England, you've got these Hugh B. Brown, these classic progressives of the church. That wouldn't look the same as whatever kind of the left is today, on a lot of issues. Or I think President Benson would be appalled at like what is done in his name, even if he was so aggressive about communists and sort of his version of the deep state. It's like he to hear a grifting, disgusting opportunist like Tim Ballard, which I will personally denounce any chance I get, to stupidly clamor and try to say the deep church and turn people against the church. I think he'd be rolling in his grave, so to speak, over that.
I absolutely think so too. Well, I mean, I know we're kind of coming into like an hour and a half here soon, or an hour maybe. I can't see the clock on my...
Yeah, we're at about an hour and 15 minutes, but if you want to keep going, I can keep going. I want to hear you read these quotes, and then
let's keep going a little bit.
Pick up. I mean, we're not under any constraint other than
that's true.
This is our thing, We're just going to put it out there and see if we can find some friends in the zeitgeist.
Yeah, let's find some like minds. Let's get together, you guys and gals, please. I'm lonely. I want to talk about this stuff with other people. We're both busy, and we need to have some other friends.
I think a lot of Latter-day Saints do think this way, and
I do too.
Are grappling with if they're not as familiar with the history, or they're not as familiar, with these specific issues. I don't want, and for anybody who's listening along, I don't want to give the impression that Jake and I think we've just got it all figured out. These things just make sense to us, and I probably don't share an enormous amount of crossover worldview with Dr. Benjamin Park. I don't know him very well. I respect his work. There are some things in the sort of the historical, maybe academic side of Mormonism that I love, and then things that I'm like, man, I think, and I don't mean this about him in particular, just having attended MHA and whatnot. I think to your point, Jake, sometimes we'll get half of the thing, but we miss we miss the utility and the brilliance and the frankly spiritual veracity, which is the most important, of blending these two things. The literalism in some aspect, and the belief in miracles, and that in the Holy Ghost, and that priesthood authority really is real and functions, and that these are a negotiation. But what I will say is I love his videos, and I love that he says history's never been as relevant as it is today,
Yeah,
and
I feel the same
it's like,
way.
same with Dan McClellan. It's like whatever his personal views are, I don't know them, and he makes it very clear that he sort of I don't know, maybe compartmentalizes those things. You have to be able to engage with this. And so, like, to the extent that maybe other Latter-day Saints are not going down those rabbit holes, I think at the very least we can all feel something. The fact that there's some trepidation that you feel to teach Sunday school this week about DNC 132, it's like there's something rumbling here,
Hmm.
and we will get out of it, but we have to get out of it by talking about it and by doing something. I'd love to hear you finish this quote, by the way. It ended right at polygamy, conceptualizations of religion as a Mormon
Hmm.
renunciation of polygamy.
Oh,
Here.
sure. Let me see. Oh, yes, I see it. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Yeah, I'll finish this one and then there's a couple more too. I'll read the highlighted sections there. So this one continues. Mormons stood to benefit as theology's hold appeared to weaken before more universalizing or pluralizing comparative taxonomies implied of religion. But since theology preserved much of its sovereignty, if in admittedly less explicit ways, one scholar describes it surviving as half disguised theological presuppositions, and approaches to Mormonism could remain little changed despite religion's substantial reframing after 1870. So I think
Okay.
that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these ebbs and flows. It's going to be, I think it's going to be really cool. We'll have to do this on another podcast episode, but the bridge into the historiography laid out by Kristen Demetz with Jesus and John Wayne, I think is really cool. There's like this fuzzy period where there's not a lot of data in these two books. Obviously, there's a lot of data, but between like the end of polygamy and maybe 1930s World War II, it's a little fuzzy between these two books, and then it snaps back into focus, especially when you take in some other sources that gives a really clear picture as to what happened to our church culturally speaking, and it just ties right back to the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As it always does. I mean, there's a reason we're doing the Doctrine and Covenants this year. We can't escape our history, and we can't escape the origin, which is so, in that sense, maybe Mohammedan, or like Jesus Christ. I mean, the Gospels, right? There's the Gospels, and then Christ leaves, and you have the Acts, and then there's sort of like, and then there was the rest of history. But like,
Hmm.
we don't jump from Nauvoo getting to Salt Lake, and then and you see this in how we tell our story, is it's like we got to Salt Lake, and it's like, and now we have the church today, and it's
Yeah.
building
Yeah.
buildings. David O. McKay's pointing and stuff. And it's like, no, 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 no.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, that's right. It's like I feel like there is something relevant to the, even we've talked about this, like the ways that this is seen negatively, in an academic sense, in a sort of like the construction of the legalistic, the legalistic version of Judaism. But like there is value to Josiah digging up the law and being like, what happened here? Like what was missing? And like I understand that sort of the approach to that story is sort of like discovering the law, right?
Mhm.
But as a symbol, as a metaphor, I think in some ways even that is powerful and relevant, because it's like we need to renegotiate. It doesn't mean everybody had it right on everything. We can't even make that stance. Like if that's an uncomfortable axiom, that it's like prophets and apostles and the church didn't have it right on everything, I think that like that opens the door for a lot of clamoring, as that we see theologically, like, oh, we gotta rid ourselves of polygamy then, or like, what happened with this? It's like you can have something, you can be not right on everything and still have a holistic approach to like, why don't we renegotiate what the theology and God and prophets were getting at. And that's in essence religion. I don't think you can go so far one way or the other until it snaps in half. Um, and so yeah, we need to rediscover the book of the law, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think so too. That I thought of the straight and narrow path in the past as a suspension bridge, that
Mm.
it
Oh,
requires these taut cables on either end and all the way along the span to bridge the gap, so to speak, and keep the bridge aloft. And you could put anything there, any two poles of a paradox. You can put faith and works, you can put Republican, Democrat, whatever. But it's was it proving contraries? Is that the
yes,
Joseph Smith
yes.
phrase?
Truth is made manifest by proving contraries.
Yeah, I think there's something profound to that. And I think that all of the great religious traditions, especially the mystical traditions, have taken that into consideration.
Hmm.
That reality is paradoxical. And like just because we don't understand all the aspects of it and how it fits together doesn't mean that it stopped being true
Hmm.
and that it stopped being paradoxical, because it's both.
Right.
And we can talk about all that philosophical stuff later, and go watch the summary of the Master and His Emissary if you
Yes,
want to
that's right.
start on that road.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and read just the highlighted sections of this quote because it's pretty large.
By the way, is
So
this Professor Jonathan B. Turner the same John Turner that just wrote the Joseph Smith biography?
I don't remember all the names. It's very likely.
All right. You go ahead
You're
and
going
read.
to look it up for me?
Oh no, this
Okay.
is old. That's an old quote. Okay.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay, cool. So, with Smith's law ostensibly being superior to civil law, Smith obviously being Joseph Smith,
This is a
Smith
quote.
controlled Mormon votes. And should Mormons come to command a majority in Illinois, then the state would have a fanatic for its de facto dictator. That was the fear. So Professor Jonathan B. Turner wrote in 1842 that the United Mormon community constituted the most dangerous and virulent enemies to our political and religious purity and our social and civic peace that now exist in the Union. No law barred Mormons from gathering, and should they choose to vote in a particular way, who could gainsay them? A disestablished polity was simply not suited to manage revelation, and the critics stretched this imposture thesis as far as they could. But granting the Mormons a treasonous theology came dangerously close to granting them status as a religion, though detractors multiplied assertions that Mormonism amounted to politics and not religion. An interesting sort of overlap in that progression.
Right.
Uh, Anti-Mormons feared Mormon fanaticism, but beneath those expressions laid an admission that the American state was ill-equipped to arbitrate religious claims. Mormonism exposed the American fantasy that religion and politics could be easily defined. I think that sentence is like the quote of the entire book. I
Hmm.
think that's what the whole history that Dr. Fluhman exposes here represents, at least to me. Okay, continuing to the next section. Mormons looked more and more fanatical to critics. The rhetoric on both sides soared until chilling cries that Mormonism must be blotted out became commonplace through religion's definitional instability loomed large as did democracies throughout religious. Sorry, I think I misread that last sentence, but basically, the definition of religion as such was in such turmoil as was the definition of democracy and how it
Right, I
functioned.
see. And that gets back
Like
to the
it's this new republic. We have to remember this. The United States has only existed for like 60 years. This is really early. I mean, when Joseph Smith had the first vision, it had only existed for more or less 30, 35 years, if I'm getting the dates right in my head. So this is a brand new experiment in democratic republican government. And so this whole separation of church and state was just tricky. It was a tricky thing for them to figure
I mean,
out.
I think we should be sympathetic to the fact that like like Latter-day Saints really were trying to build a theocracy. Um, and it was a functional, even if it wasn't legally a theocracy, it was functionally a theocracy. That's what it's still a theocracy in some sense. I mean, as a religion, as a religious expression, it's just not less of a theocracy than any religious kind of expression or movement. Um, and and it's very ironic. It's very ironic for this history, for the fear to be that there'd be this singular leader elected by God to like that a sort of divine right of kings thinking
Mhm.
that it's like, well, he may not be perfect, but he's God's anointed. And and uh and I will say, I think this goes back to what you just said at the beginning, which is that, like, how do we define a religion? That Mormonism is sort of what pushed the how to approach it and how to define it to begin with, because they did not like the idea that that could be a legitimate, religion and movement. And I do think that, like, we're old enough now and we've grown up in a space where we've largely mostly been around. Even if people don't know what we are, it's like, oh, you're something. But at this time,
Mhm.
it is brand new. It's like something's going on in the West, man. For the past 60 years, these
Yeah.
Mormons, what are they doing? So
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's the last quote that I pulled from A Peculiar People. The next ones are from Jesus and John Wayne, and I just don't think that I want to go into that just due to time constraints, because I do have to leave, not immediately, but pretty soon to
Yeah.
go get some work done.
Yeah. Same. We could do a part two. I mean, we've done a hour and 30 minutes on peculiar people. Maybe Jake set us up for next time. Just set us up on how these things move, because I think we spent a lot of time on this in a way we didn't really
Mhm.
get to
Yeah.
previously. I'm really glad. So kind of tell the story of where a peculiar people ends and how it begins in bridging the gap, and then we'll pick
Yeah.
up with our
Yeah.
friend Mark Driscoll.
Mark Driscoll. Yeah, in that case, I wrote a couple things here. I'm going to go ahead and read these two things that I wrote
Please.
and then go from there. So, Mormonism was seen by American Protestants first as not a religion at all, then, or just a fraud set up by a con man. Then it was seen as a false religion akin to Islam, a theocratic kingdom set up to steal American freedom and women away to a cult like tyranny in the West. Then finally, at the end of the 1800s, mostly due to the Edmunds-Tucker Act and the end of polygamy, it was seen as a heretical religion, but a religion nonetheless. And that's kind of where we find ourselves now, is as the heretic and the infidel, and not just the like con guy, the conned person. Although there are people who still say that. And that's sort of the very broad arc of A Peculiar People. And then this thing that I wrote, I think, gives a little glimpse into why I think it bridges into Jesus and John Wayne. So, our cultural instincts to try to assimilate are common amongst all religious minorities, I believe. But in particular, we Latter day Saints have been driven, beaten, raped, had property stolen, extermination orders given, submitted to federal occupation, been stabbed in the back by politician after politician, all while taking the most vile verbal and intellectual abuse by the cultural majority Protestants, whose hatred seemed to know no bounds. Pioneer Latter day Saints were caricatured as mentally insane and even ethnically non white, so as to further distinguish Mormons from the pure American Christian nation that so many evangelicals and other Protestants wanted and still want? Question mark. Then, to top it all off, federal agents were sent via the Edmunds-Tucker Act to forcibly separate families living under plural marriage and imprison the men if they could catch them, all to end a system of family life which they did not understand, but chafed too harshly against Victorian romantic sensibilities to let it lie. Utah women lost the right to vote. Many of its leading men went into hiding, and the stage was set for the assimilating impulse to come out with full strength. And what group did we seek to assimilate into? What image did we hope to copy to gain favor? The same band of creedal Protestants who had driven the saints out of New York and Ohio and Missouri and Illinois and chased them out to Utah as to never let them forget who was in charge. America's Constitution claims to give out religious freedom to all of its citizens, but the Latter-day Saint legacy stands as a firm testimony that this right has not been meted out evenly. No wonder we want to assimilate. No wonder we feel shame that we just don't fit in. But that's just it. We don't really fit in, do we? We never have. Just like the Muslim and the Sikh and the Jew and all the other religious minorities who try to find their place in the great melting pot of North America. The question is whether or not we are ready to take pride in our difference, as our cultural and literal ancestors once did, not as a brash, triumphalist middle finger waving proud in the air, but the calm inner strength that comes from knowing that we are right with God, and that whether or not we have everything figured out at the moment does not matter as much as the fact that we are figuring it out together, bound by covenant, and that if someone who hates us, and whose father hated us, and whose grandfather and great-grandfather hated us, comes to us and says, we are not Christians, we feel at ease to brush their words aside and say that if Christian means we follow the creeds, then no, we are not. But we are disciples of Christ, and then it is up to us to live that holy and heavy mantle.
Beautiful, Jake. Beautiful. Extremely well put. I love that. I'm going to revisit that. Thank you for writing that. That's gorgeous, and that so I feel so understood. And I think many a member of the church would read that and feel that way in their heart of hearts. So that's extremely well put. Joseph Smith said that if we are wrong and we don't go to heaven and we're all sent down to hell, then we'll turn the devils out and make a heaven out of it. And I mean, if that
That's
is
right.
not a
I
latter,
just love that.
yeah, that's right. That's right. We're joint heirs with Jesus Christ, and he is trying to help us learn how to build heaven where we stand. And it does not mean that he is not everything and he has done everything. It means that he is hoping that we will be partakers of the tree of life with him, and that after grace, then we do all we can. And it's despite all we can do that we're saved by grace alone, and then we do all we can do to try to become like Christ and our heavenly parents would want us to be. So thank you for writing that. I think that's a great note to end on, and next time we'll pick up from where that ends and we shift into the modern era with Jesus and
This
John.
is where things get real wild. Do you think the 1800s was wild? Just wait till you get into the 20th century. Because it's like, it's not talked about as much. I think that I felt more blindsided by the 20th century history than I did the 19th century history, because it's
Yeah,
not talked about and it's so close. It's like,
yeah,
whoa, my grandpa, could have known these people or something like that. And it's really insane to see how things have played out, both on the evangelical side and the Latter-day Saint side, and how it all comes together. So
oh,
it'll be
it
cool to
aligns right
continue
there
that
with Watchmen
conversation.
on the Tower
Oh
and
yeah.
with Ben Spackman's thesis and all of these things simultaneously happening, where the assimilation kicks into high gear and the evangelical really is born.
The masculinity conversation is one that I'm really interested to have, because I think that it's something extremely relevant to our cultural moment, and it's something that I think Latter-day Saint scripture and history can answer in a very productive way. Like, what does it mean to be a man? And I think that we're not giving boys the tools to navigate their transition to manhood as a society. But the evangelical solution, writ large, insert caveats here, seems to be return to the cowboy and a
Mm-hmm.
mythicized version of the cowboy. And there's a lot of baggage that comes with that. And we're
Yep.
going to get to that next
Yep.
time.
So, all right, awesome, great work, great chatting with you, Jake. And
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
tune in, we will see you on the next one.
Absolutely.